What's happening, everyone? Welcome to this episode of Corner Table Talk. Today, I am so pleased to have as my guest Chip Wade. Chip is the CEO of Danny Meyer's Union Square Hospitality. Chip joined the Union Square Hospitality executive team as president in 2019, following a 30-year career in operational leadership in the hospitality industry. In 2022, he was named Chief Executive Officer, CEO. Prior to joining USHG, Chip spent 17 years with Darden Restaurants, where he oversaw all operating functions, drove best in-industry people metrics, and enhanced financial performance for a number of Darden's high-growth brands. He also served as Chief Operating Officer for Legal Seafood in Boston, where he led all operations for the family-owned group's 31 restaurants. A Pennsylvania native, Chip got his culinary degree from Johnson & Wales, his BS from Widener University, and his MBA from the University of Texas at Dallas. And I want to give a shout out to my man, Eric Williams of the Stone Williams Group, for connecting me with Chip. Thank you, E. Chip, welcome, man. We got you on Corner Table Talk. How you doing?
Brad, I couldn't be better. Delighted to be here. I've been a big fan of yours for years, and it's an honor to spend some time with you.
Oh, thank you, brother. So I'm going to jump in here. I've got two what I call short order questions. I'm sure you're familiar with that terminology, so we'll just dive in. What are you listening to, Chip, musically? What's in your earbuds these days?
Yeah, these days I've been really getting back to mid-'70s R&B. So I've been listening to a lot of Phoebe Snow. I've been listening to Gil Scott-Heron.
Yes.
Obviously, Stevie Wonder. I think his Inner Vision album was probably the best album he ever produced. And then Pat Metheny is always on my playlist.
I love that, man. Do you make your own playlists?
I do.
Yeah.
And it's, I love all music. I love talking about music. I'm a big fan of Dave Matthews, right? I think he produces some great music. And I listen to country, George Strait. But right now I'm in this period of mid-'70s and just getting my groove on, if you will.
Yeah. Gil is one of my all-time favorites, man. So I always got a little Gil Scott on my playlist. All right, last great meal that you had at a restaurant. Where might that have been?
Zuni Cafe in San Francisco. And I had the roasted chicken. I was there 10 days ago or so. And I went there for an early lunch. That is just a fantastic restaurant that's been around, I want to say, at least 45 years. The people are friendly. It's just an iconic restaurant. But their roasted chicken, without question, is the best chicken I've ever had.
I'm going to have to go for that, man. You sold me. Chip, People always ask me, and friends, they say, oh, I don't want to cook for you. You're a restaurateur. And they, when you go out, you must start evaluating from the front door. Sometimes I do. How do you approach restaurants, man, when you go in as a customer, as a guest?
I got to tell you, I do get asked that question a lot, but 60-70% of my time is an operator. My wife initially, when we were dating, first as a fiance, now my wife, really didn't enjoy dining with me because I was looking at the lighting and the tables and the sound and the vibe and the music. And so when I approach a restaurant, I go there as an operator. I go there because I'm curious and I want to learn. And then I go there as a guest, if you will.
Yeah.
It's hard to take the restaurateur hat off.
I know, man. I know. Yeah. Chip, do you have a pet peeve when you walk in one of your places? Is there something that immediately catches your eye and right away you've got to make an adjustment?
Yeah, I have a couple, but first and foremost, I want eye contact from the host, from the maitre d' staff. I want eye contact and I want a big smile. And whether it's my restaurant or someone else's restaurant, that smile, that look, that acknowledgement that says, I see you, if I don't get that, that is a pet peeve of mine. And number two is the restrooms, right? Whether I have to use the restroom or not, I always make a point to go into the restroom. I think the restroom tells you a lot about the operator and how important they think about cleanliness and standards And like, if you can't keep your restroom clean, probably your office is dirty. The cook line is probably needs to be burnished up. Restrooms are really important to me.
Yeah, I'm with
Yeah.
you on that, man. I'm also big on lighting. I'll walk in and I'll start adjusting the lights if I feel they're not right for the moment.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
is, a good friend of mine, Marcus Samuelson. I love spending time with him. He obviously is a culinarian, but Marcus pays attention to the music, to the vibe, to the lighting, to the artwork, as Danny does as well. And those things truly matter.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
So let's I want to touch on Danny for a minute. So Danny Meyer is one of the most respected and admired hospitality executives in the industry. I mean, around the world.
Around the world.
Yeah. That makes your position as CEO of Union Square Hospitality one of the most coveted jobs, Chip. So, what kind of responsibility comes with working with and being responsible for maintaining best in class standards?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I would say, first of all, I've been now with Danny and USHG for 6 years, as you noted in the introduction.
Mhm.
And it is a role, obviously, I take seriously. I'm having the time of my life, and I really enjoy collaborating with Danny. There is some, pressure, if you will, self-imposed with regards to grabbing the baton from this iconic leader. Right now, Danny graciously um, gave me the title and the role of CEO, but he still comes into the office. Right, still there as coaching. I think first and foremost, to answer your question, the responsibility of making sure that I maintain the great culture of USHG, that an employee first centric model, which has been at the heart of enlightened hospitality and at the heart of what Danny has created. I think that's job number one, is to maintain the culture, keep it vibrant, allow it to evolve, because culture is just like a living, breathing
It's
human being.
fluid.
It has to evolve and grow.
Yeah.
We often talk about culture. I heard this great quote that culture is like a baby, like a newborn, right? You got to feed it a lot. You got to keep your eye on it 24/7. And when it makes a mess, you got to clean it up quickly,
Mm.
right? And so that's how we, humorously keep an eye on the culture. So that's number one I think about with regard to my responsibilities. Responsibility number two is to make sure that we maintain our remarkably high standards on both hospitality and culinary.
Mhm.
So I have the responsibility of making sure that I'm giving constant feedback to our teams, that I'm praising them when they're exceeding the expectations of all of our stakeholders, but also we use this term, right, centering the salt shaker if for some reason the business is out of line, right? And so those are, to me, the two big responsibilities that I have.
That's an interesting metaphor, centering the salt shaker. Chip, if you would, you started with USHG as president and then became CEO. Just if you would differentiate those two roles for me.
Sure. When I joined, I had, a couple of direct reports. Danny was the CEO, and he retained legal and marketing reporting into him, right? And I assumed all other functions and disciplines, including operations. And so when I moved into the CEO role, not only did I assume the functional leadership responsibility for marketing and legal, but I also grabbed the baton with regard to, at times, the external face of the company,
Mm.
right? And so the demands of my time has increased significantly. And that could be, for example, the relationships that I share with our CFO and our bankers, right? Um, as an example, the second example is board reporting, board communication. I now lead all that. That's all the, prepping for the board work, communicating with our board, setting the agenda. I now run and I'm responsible for all of that. When I was president, Danny was still responsible for that.
I see. Is the role kind of what you expected, what you anticipated, or bigger? What's your take on how you thought this job would be?
I would say without question, it is bigger than I thought. Um, and I think is Danny and I used to talk about this a lot after the announcement, which is and I just touched on this, just the amount of, um, request of my time, media request of my time. Uh, could you attend this conference? I'd love to pick your brain. There's really two dynamics here at play, Brad. One is becoming the CEO of this highly regarded company, and the second thing is becoming a black CEO.
Yeah.
And as you and I both know, there are not a lot of black CEOs, not just in our industry, but in business, period. And so it brought with it a high degree of like awareness and recognition.
Hmm.
And I'm learning how to respectfully say no because again, the demands are high.
As evidenced by my attempts to talk to you occasionally, and Ann has to say, "Well, how about 15 minutes?" And but
Yeah,
thank you, man. You've been really generous given the demands on your time.
yeah.
Um, I want to talk about Danny's 2006 book, "Setting the Table." I read it when it came out, and for me, it just so much of it resonated as it did across the industry with everyone. And Danny refers to the term that you spoke of a couple of minutes ago, enlightened hospitality. And you list his book as one of your favorite leadership books. And here we are, Chip, it's 2025. And, again, Enlightened Hospitality was written in 2006. And we talk about how culture is constantly evolving. And I'm curious from your purview as CEO, what does enlightened hospitality look like in 2025? And how do you keep an eye on that from your purview
Hmm.
as CEO?
Yeah, great question. I will begin with I read the book around 2007 and 2008. And like you just indicated, the book literally had a profound impact on me. And I'm a voracious reader. I enjoy reading. Um, and what I saw in the book were thoughts and ideas that I believed in, and it was the first time that you saw it on paper, right? The first time that it came to life. I ended up buying 115 copies of Danny's book, and I gave it to. I was running a division then for Red Lobster, and I gave it to every one of my directors and all 95 of my GMs. And one quirkiness about me. I gave them homework. The only way that I know that they were going to read the book is if I gave them a 15 questionnaire that they had to type the response and send back to me. So I just thought I'd share that. I think how do we keep this notion of enlightened hospitality alive at USHG? We do it in a couple of ways. Number one, it's about hiring the right people, right? And we're very disciplined, very focused when we look for executive chefs all the way down to porters, right? And so we talk about these six characteristic traits that are absolutely essential when we're hiring individuals. I'll give you a couple, but we want individuals with a high degree of empathy, right? That they
Mhm.
are compassionate and caring. We want a strong work ethic. We want people who are optimistic and warmth. And so there's these characteristic traits that we believe when we find them in individuals that they're more likely to help us keep enlightened hospitality alive. At the
Mhm.
core of enlightened hospitality is really about how you make others feel. And it starts with our employees and then the other stakeholders that we have in our model. So that's our guests, that's our vendors, that's our investors, and the community. And so, how you make people feel is so powerful. that you're listening to them, their needs, their wants, and their fears. The other way that we keep it alive and vibrant is by having the courage to let go and displace people who don't demonstrate those characteristics I just mentioned. And organizations are often very good at talking about their core values or their beliefs and their behaviors and the way they hire people, but it takes courage to let someone leave or ask someone to leave the organization that doesn't live our beliefs and our behaviors. And you really have to do both. You have to hire great, you have to consistently talk about enlightened hospitality, and then you have to fire, exit people who don't live those behaviors and beliefs.
Yeah. I would imagine, Chip, some of that bumps up against the reality of a couple of things. And I'll come back to some of the challenges you and I spoke about, in specifically some of the challenges in California relative to minimum wage. And I want to bring up immigration, but I'll come back to that. But a great quote that I love from Maya Angelou. She said, "People won't necessarily remember what you said. They won't remember what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel."
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that is so key in our business, that you want folks leaving feeling like they had an experience that they want to talk about.
Yeah, exactly right. And for us, I'm going to add this last note that I really want them to talk about the workforce, our employees, right? And because there's something interesting about our industry, and it's driven by Instagram and our phones, right? I can go to Zuni Cafe or Kefico in San Francisco. I can take photos of great food and then kind of share it with my chefs here. You can't take a photo of hospitality, right? You
Right.
can't take a photo of someone's heart and their empathy. And so I think the magic of what has made Danny and USHG so successful is that fundamental practice and belief that the way you're going to win is by the way you make people feel.
Couldn't agree more. Um, on the subject of leadership, you listed several books and also named some individuals that you admire. Ken Chenault, the former CEO of American Express. Love Ken. I saw him give a fireside chat last year at a conference, and what insight, him and Robert Smith together, man. I could have listened
Mm.
to them for hours. You mentioned Kobe, of course, Danny, Reginald Lewis, Beatrice, first Black-owned company to reach $1 billion in sales. Um, Talk about, Chip, if you would, the qualities that attract you to leaders. And one of the attributes that caught my eye that you mentioned that I absolutely love was fun to be around. But talk about the leadership qualities that attract you, that you look for.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things, right? I think, first of all, a leader has a role. Ken Chenault often says this, which is to provide reality and hope. And I think the leaders you just mentioned and the men and women that I admire consistently share the reality of the situation in the business as well as inspire and give hope. I think that is critically important. I think a leader has to be decisive because issues and problems, internal or external, are coming at you quickly. And so I think a leader has to be decisive. Number three, what I look for, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, which is the notion of empathy, right? We work in an industry that is high touch. We employ, single moms, right? We employ these young adults who are just getting out of college, right? Many of them are in college. I got my first start in this industry at the age of 15. And so for me, a leader has to be empathetic and show compassion. Um, and then I think the last thing is, it's part of that reality is you got to get really good at confrontation and giving feedback, right? I say to my people, my team, I'm going to give you feedback whether you want it or not. And I say that with the dot dot dot. I care so much about you as an individual that I'm going to give you feedback. And so those are the leadership some of the characteristics that I look for.
Did any of that come uh, difficult for you? Was it because I know my nature, Chip, is non-confrontational,
Yeah.
But in our business, when you have to do what you just said, give someone feedback whether they like it or not, that's not a natural attribute for a lot of folks. But was that part of your personality always, or did you have to develop the
Yeah.
ability to say what needed to be said in the moment?
No, it's really for me. And listen, I'm still a work of clay, right? I'm still being molded and shaped. But I would say it is a skill and a behavior that is learned, and I had to work on,
Yeah.
right? And if I can share this story, I learned from our workforce, right? I learned from our employees over the years. And so the most challenging decision any leader has to make is terminating, right? And particularly around performance, right? It's pretty easy to fire someone if they're stealing with you, or if they take a stupid pill and have a relationship with an hourly employee. That's a no-brainer, right? But to fire someone that's been with you a long period of time and they're just not able to evolve and grow in performance, that's pretty hard to do. What I've learned over the years is you have to have courage. That if you fail to make a leadership decision, a firing, that the rest of the organization is aware of it, right? And you've run restaurants, you know this as well as I. If you have a bad server and you have 23 other servers on the staff, they all know that server is underperforming, late, rude, disobedient, you name it. And so when we finally leaders make the decision to fire that person, the rest of the staff says, "What the hell took you so long?" Right? And so I have learned the importance of giving candid feedback because I care about the rest of the workforce as much as I do about the individual who's underperforming.
Yeah, I get that, man. Sports analogies, so often work for me, Chip. And if you've got five guys on the floor and each guy has their role, if we're playing basketball,
Yeah.
and the rebounder is not rebounding, he's not. You gotta pull somebody off the bench, man. You have to get that guy off the court because people on the bench see that person's not performing. So to your point, I think it brings the organization down when you don't respond appropriately.
You're exactly right, and it also erodes the culture that you're trying to build.
Yeah. One name I left off, but I wanted to add to the folks that you admire is somebody that I have great admiration for, and that's Bill Russell. Aside from his extraordinary basketball career, he was also a powerful voice for social justice and civil rights. And I know that you are a collector of rare books. In the sample that I saw, you have a deep interest in the journey of Black Americans, and you have a collection on the subject of slavery that dates back to 1857. I mean, I would love to sit in your library for a couple of hours and just absorb some of the stuff that you have in there, Chip. You also have works by some couple of members of the Black founders of the Black Panther Party, Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, also W.E.B. Du Bois, Gordon Parks, Angela Davis, just to name a few, are all included. So talk about your interest in African American history from the perspective of your rare book collection.
Sure. So you mentioned Bill Russell, been a big fan of his. Never had the opportunity to watch him play, but he's won at every level. Very
Yep.
few people know that. At the
Yep.
high school level, at the collegiate level, obviously at the pros as a coach. And so I admire winners. There's another name that maybe I failed to mention, which is Clarence Otis, right? As you mentioned, Ken Chenault. Clarence has been a sponsor for me. He's been a mentor, a counselor. So, with regard to my book collection, I'm very passionate about this because I'm curious by nature, number one, and I like to learn. I was probably 27 when I read Malcolm X's autobiography, 27 or 28, and co-authored by Alex Haley, and it had a huge impact on me. And because I'm curious, I went to find other writings by other Black Panther leaders. I was 5 or 6 years old when the Black Panther movement was at its peak. What I learned, like most Americans, black and white, what we learned about the Black Panther movement was what we saw on the press. And it never placed the Black Panther leaders in the movement in a favorable light, right? It was always negative, militant. But they failed to cover the impact that the Black Panther movement and the leaders had on our communities. And
Sure.
as I'm reading some of this material, I thought, like, holy shit, excuse my candor. Like, A, how come I didn't know this? And it just fed my appetite to read more. And so the as I moved from Black Panther movement to Jim Crow era to slavery and slavery, what I keep learning in my collection is our stories obviously have not been told. That there were prominent Black Americans who've made significant contributions to the fabric of America. And I'm just on this journey to keep learning more about them. And if I can, in a small way, share their stories and highlight them. And I think this is important. Some of the gentlemen that you and I talked about, whether it's Clarence or Ken, Bill Lewis, those leaders are all standing on the shoulders of Vernon Jordan, right? Now, I feel like I'm in the position to stand on their shoulders. But the part about my collection and the history is acknowledging that there were prominent men and women that Vernon stood on, and we just don't know them.
That's heavy. Chip, what impact do you think it has on society, Black society, society as a whole, when we don't get to hear these stories, when we don't know about these stories? You know, I lived in Los Angeles for 30 years after moving there from New York. I only, since the wildfires, found out about Altadena and its significant Black community, multi-generational Black community, and how they were affected by redlining and, you know, these stories that don't get told. How do you think that the limited knowledge of people and events affect us?
Well, I think it affects individuals. I think it affects communities, and then I think it affects the fabric of the United States. And it affects us in the ways because we remain ignorant to our history, and we remain blind to the people and the events, and how they shaped America. And then we can't grow as an individual if we're not welcoming different ideas and different perspectives, if we're not welcoming the history of the United States. And so we just become, at the bottom line, Brad, an ignorant society.
Yeah.
And then when we become ignorant, we then become indifferent.
Mhm.
And then we won't take action to evolve and mature as an individual, as communities, and then as the United States.
And back to that word that you brought up earlier, there's a lack of empathy
Yes. Yeah.
that comes
And
as a result. Yeah.
yeah, exactly right. And
Yeah.
so, we have to, this is me philosophically, right? This idea of how do we care more for mankind, right? How do we care about them, their trials, their tribulations, and how do we help each other? Yeah, individuals, you mentioned teams. Teams win when they care for each other. When you put the, your community ahead of yourself, everyone wins. I
Yeah.
firmly believe that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You know, a little off subject here, but you know, the NCAA basketball tournament is just starting, getting underway, and my wife has a hard time peeling me away from the TV when it's on. But Chip, to me, you know, everything aside, arguing about whether college athletes should be paid, shouldn't be paid. When I look at those games and I look into the stands and I see Americans side by side cheering on these young kids and these kids playing their hearts out, one
Mm.
game elimination, and I see mixed race couples, mixed race kids. Just it's a unifying event for me, and I that's one of the times I feel the best about this country and its potential.
Yeah, I would add to that, and I would agree. We're a big sports family. We're a big hospitality family. I have two sons. One is in the business of sports. He's an assistant coach. My other son is in the business of hospitality. And I think sports has a way of galvanizing and connecting us. I think music, great music, has that same effect, right? I think about Beyonce and her album, her country and western album. I forget the name of it. I should know the title, but it escapes me. I think she has opened eyes to folks who just love great country music and they don't really care about the color. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
give me some great entertainment, give me great music, give me great action on the field, and I don't care what color the person is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I want to turn this back around to hospitality. You know, we opened our last restaurant in Los Angeles in 2012 in an area, Baldwin Hills, South Los Angeles, predominantly African American community. And you know, we ran our normal ads at the time. It was primarily Craigslist for hiring. 50 or 60 or so people showed up. 5 potential African American employees, and I knew 3 of them from previous work. Um, I'm curious from your point of view. Um, and let me back. I know that Clarence. You mentioned Clarence,
Mm-hmm.
Clarence Otis, former CEO of Darden, and I know I had him as a guest on. In fact, he just preceded you, and I know that you worked with him, and he had to have had a big impact on your career. So before I ask the broader question, let me ask you what impact working with Clarence had on you, and then I'll come back to my industry question.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to state something that we say a lot in the Black community, and it is germane also to women, right? Which is, if you can't see it, you can't believe it. And so for me, I was probably in my late 30s when I joined Darden Restaurants. Clarence then was the EVP and Chief Financial Officer. Um, and so there's power in seeing a prominent, for me, prominent Black leader in that critical position. Um, I was on the Olive Garden brand leading design and construction, and I walked into one of my very first meetings of all of the operators leaders with Olive Garden. And at this point, I'd probably been 15 years in my career and spent a good portion at TGI Fridays. And I had never seen a Black vice president. And so I walk into this Olive Garden meeting, and then there's a man named Doug Green, who
Mhm.
later became my boss and today is a good friend. And I got to tell you, right, I just like, okay, this feels good. There's comfort there.
Mhm.
And so, with regard to Clarence, it was, I get to see a leader. I later had the opportunity to work directly for Clarence when he became the president of Smoky Bones. And so I watched his behavior, I watched his preparation. I watched how he led the senior leadership team meeting, and so it's just kind of learning that learning in real time. Um, and so we can't underestimate the power of that.
Sure, sure. You know, having been in the business for many decades, as have you, you know, I've certainly seen the growth of people of color, Black folks participating in hospitality. Black chefs are winning James Beard Awards. There's more inclusion in the media. As a Black hospitality executive with 30 plus years and counting experience, how do you view, Chip, the appeal of the industry, the hospitality industry to young Black folks? Are you seeing an uptick in the pursuit of careers in hospitality?
The answer is yes. And so I view it with an optimistic lens, and it gives me a sense of fulfillment and pride, right? I also am very fortunate to be on the board of trustees for Johnson and Wales University. And so I'm able to see these young adults, they're 17 and 18, as they're starting their hospitality or culinary career. And they have been watching Marcus's of the world and others that you've noted on Food Network or the magazines, and they aspire to move into the industry, be it culinary or hospitality. So I view it as very positive. the other dynamic, which is exciting, is particularly here in New York, San Francisco, Toronto, where you have really diverse cities, Los Angeles included, then those that population brings the cuisine and the culture to the community. And so you have, white Americans now for 25 years are now falling in love with, whether you call it comfort food or soul food, but also like Caribbean food and, African food. And so I view it as very, very optimistically.
Yes. Yeah. We had Gregory Gordet on our podcast last year or 2 years ago at James Beard, Haitian, very popular restaurant, I believe, in Portland.
Mm,
And who would have called that, 10 years ago? So
yeah.
definitely an evolution happening there. So, Chip, your first job graduating from undergrad in '86 was at TGI Fridays. Your salary was $24K. Even adjusting for inflation, that's pretty modest. With your educational background, ultimately receiving your MBA, you could have chosen other fields. Why hospitality?
Well, I love my grandmother had a huge influence on me. My grandmother was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and she migrated north as a preteen, 14 or 15 years old when she migrated to the north. And so I watched my grandmother, who helped to raise us. Again, I was raised by a single mom. When my mom was working 2 and 3 jobs, we were at our grandparents' house, and so the being in the kitchen with my grandmother and watching her cook, not only did she influence me, but watching her serve her husband, right, hospitality, who worked hard at a factory, but she proudly would prepare his plate.
Hmm.
When I came home from culinary school, often, Thanksgiving break or spring break, whatever, before I went to my mom's house, I went to my grandmother's house, and she said, come on in." She'd give me a big hug and she'd say, "What do you want to eat?" And so I would say, Grandma, I ate on the plane. I'm not hungry. And she said, "Boy, I'm going to cook you something. What do you want to eat?" Right. And so I could have gone into any industry, but there is power in our industry. Food connects people.
Hmm.
And, um, and I like being with people. I like connecting with people, and there's power in food and hospitality. And that's why I got into this industry, and it's why I stayed.
Well, we're all grateful that you did.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going to dip my toe a little bit here in politics. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but this is something that, topic of discussion for a lot of folks I know. So you list Reginald Lewis as an influence, and he took part, I didn't know this until recently, in a summer program at Harvard that was initiated by the Rockefeller Foundation. And the purpose of the program was to introduce studying law to African American students. Reginald was so impressive in the program. He's the only person in the school's 148-year history to be accepted into Harvard Law without even applying. So that's not to say there wouldn't have been a Reginald Lewis without that program. Clearly, he would have found a way. But it did get him noticed, Chip.
Mm.
Has the aggressive pushback against DEI affected Union Square hospitality in any way, or you personally in any way?
Well, to be candid with you, the answer is yes and yes. Right? Me personally, initially, Brad, I was saddened, right? It just pulls at your heart when you think about all of the work as a nation, as a people that we did from, Brown versus Board of Education to the civil rights laws that were passed in the mid 60s. There was 20 years of struggle and work um, to make sure that we as a people were recognized and understand that we could and have contributed to society.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was saddened by that. My heart was broken by the recent kind of pushback. Now, that sadness has now turned to optimism because I
Mhm.
quickly said, like, as a people and as a nation, we've been through this before. I No one likes to go backwards, and it feels like we are. But the reality is, we have navigated through setbacks and difficulties before. Individuals at the local level, some politicians have stepped up, and I'm confident that today and in the future that there is work behind the scenes recognizing where we are, that we will get back on the right track, to use that term, and move the country forward. But there's no denying that this is the topic of the day and that it has impacted individuals and organizations. For USHG, we're firm on our commitment to diversity and inclusion, right? And we don't run away from it. We continue to stay focused on making sure that our workforce looks like the city of New York.
Mhm.
And the reality is that our guests care and matter about inclusion, hospitality, and diversity. And so for us, it means that we continue the dialogue internally. I should say it elevated in a way. Your question was, has it impacted me in USHG? For USHG, we're elevating the conversation.
Mhm.
We are continuing to take action to make sure that our workforce, again, looks like the city of New York, that we're giving individuals, Hispanic, Asian Americans, Black Americans, women, a seat at the table. And so I think this idea that um, at the end of the day, we have to keep reminding people that the data is in, man, right? All the
Mhm.
empirical research is in. It's been done. You name it, Bain, McKinsey. When companies, when organizations have diversity, have a diverse organization, they are going to win financially, right? It's just like this simple idea that if we're trying to field a team and you field a team with middle-aged white men and I field a team with Asian, Black, Hispanics, I'm going to win. I'm going to win every time.
Mhm.
And so, whether that is qualitative or quantitative, for me and my business, I know that we're going to win.
Chip, staying here for another question or subject. So you and I are close enough in age. I'm a little bit older than you, but we're products of our families, our fathers, mothers who fought for civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
And I often have this conversation with some of my friends my age that has our generation of black men and women done enough? I mean, we certainly benefited by going to the schools that our parents fought for us to be able to go to. We even integrated the restaurants that they had yet to integrate. And this is as recent as the 70s and the 80s. I can remember in New York where finally we started to trickle out into these places, sometimes at the detriment to black owned businesses, right? Because then all of a sudden a lot of that trade went elsewhere. But we have benefited with the jobs and what have you, as a result of the struggle for civil rights. Have we done enough? Are we doing enough? Is our leadership what's our leadership look like right now?
Yeah. So, a couple things. Have we done enough? I'm going to say no, right? Have I done enough? I would say I haven't, and I think our generation could do more, and maybe should have done more. However, you want to define more. With regard to our leadership, I think the idea in the Black community that the idea of waiting for, and you hear this and you read about this for decades now, which is like, who is the next ML King, right? Who's the singular Black leader that will speak on behalf of the Black community? Well, I think that's a false narrative, and we should not expect that. I think that we have a number of prominent Black leaders in government. Warnock, the senator from
Raphael Warnock.
Raphael
Mhm.
Warnock, thank you, from
Mhm.
Georgia. I think of we've got leadership in politics. We have leadership in universities. We have leadership in business, and I think what we should do and what needs to do is to elevate their voices and elevate their presence.
Mhm.
And I could play a role. I just finished a session in collaboration with NYU recently where I hosted 80 students, and I, in celebration of Black History Month, had a full day workshop and seminars and networking with some of the more prominent Black leaders and chefs that came to New York and supported. And so, listen, Rosalind Brewer, Melody Hobson, Rashida Jones, who's the president of MSNBC, right? These are prominent Black leaders that work today in key roles and behind the scenes, but many Americans don't know them.
Mhm.
And so I think we can do more.
I'd agree, but I think amplifying those voices is essential.
Yeah.
So turning on a more personal note, you have
Brad,
a
can I
couple.
add, can I
Yeah,
add one more
please,
thing, Brad?
please,
Which is
yes.
irritant that I
Hmm.
have, which is we in the Black community and society at large, we celebrate sports heroes, right? When you ask a young white 15-year-old, they're going to point you to maybe a rapper, maybe to a sports figure, right? And my comment that I just made is I want that 15-year-old, both black and white and Asian, to know the Ken Chenaults of the world, to know the Rosalind Brewers of the world, right? And to know the Melody Hobsons of the world. And so when I say we can do more, that's another example.
But yeah, and to your point, I think that goes back to the importance of having those stories told, right? Because if they're not told, how does that young white kid know about Ken Chenault?
Right.
It's not going to be talked about at his dinner table like it might at ours.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, a couple of influences in your life that you mentioned. Your mom, of course, who worked job. She worked a couple of jobs, and one of
Yep.
them was as a factory worker. Your uncle, Dr. John O. Simpson, who had a distinguished career in education in the public school system in Norfolk, Virginia. So, Chip, what were the qualities that you picked up on early on from your mom and Dr. Simpson, and how would you say those qualities that you saw early helped shape who you are?
Yeah. Thank you. Puts a smile on my face. Both sadly have passed away, but
Sorry.
they still touch me. I think first of all, I got from my mom and my uncle John an amazing work ethic, right? And so I work the way I do today because of those two individuals. Number two, I got this in my DNA, the notion of persevering through obstacles, right? Again, my father left my mom when I was five-ish, my younger brother. And so my mom just okay, I'm going to figure this out. I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to raise intelligent, law-abiding, God-fearing kids. And I'm going to get support from my aunts and uncles played a role, my grandparents. The second thing I got from both my uncle and my mom was perseverance. Number three was a desire to learn. And you mentioned Dr. Simpson, my uncle. My uncle had a bachelor's degree, two master's degree, and a doctorate's degree. Like
Wow.
he
Wow.
wanted to learn. My
Hmm.
mom was the same way. She graduated from high school, but my mom read two, three papers a day. And she was curious about music. She was curious about the arts. And so, what I learned from both of them was the power of education and the power of um, staying curious. I want to add one last thing, and I think about my uncle in particular. I was a junior in college, so I'd finished culinary school, and I had the opportunity to live with my uncle, my aunt Rita, and their young son. And as we noted, I grew up without a dad. I watched my uncle I watched my uncle, and I learned how to be a husband.
Mhm.
Right? I learned how to be a father. Now, my uncle was tough and stern,
Mhm.
and he clearly was opinionated. But if you don't see, if you're not in an environment where you see a husband or a father get up from the dinner table and help put the dishes away or cook, I mean, it's a small little thing. I know it sounds odd, but this idea that, we know how to become a father or we know how to become a mother, it's not innate. You have to watch someone. And I watched my uncle, and he influenced me to become, I hope, a great spouse to my wife Pam, and a great father to my two kids.
Well, thank you. And you kind of took a little bit of my next question, but
Oh,
I'm gonna ask it anyway. You're a dad, and
yeah.
as am I. You have two sons, I believe, Andrew and Mitchell. So you kind of went into this a little bit, Chip. But what makes a great father?
Um, I think a great father. That's a great question. I think a great father is present. You cannot kind of you just can't, what's the term I'm looking for, like fake this, right? You
Right.
have to be present first
Yeah.
and foremost. um, you have to, in my opinion, a great father is firm but fair, right? I was really clear with my sons about certain expectations. I was firm but fair. Um, and frankly, as you know, in our community, I had to be,
Sure.
right. I think a great father is a great listener, and then a great father, lastly, is a great coach. My kids are today, in their 20s. While I'm still a father, the biggest role I play now is a coach and a mentor, right? I
Mhm.
get on a phone with my kids 4 or 5 times a year, and we do these Zoom calls, and there's a topic du jour. We were on the phone for 90 minutes, over the summer, and we were talking about Black wealth. And I spent a significant amount of work preparing for this conversation. And I'm just at 26 and 28, I'm saying, all right, guys, we're going to have a 90-minute conversation about Black wealth. And what does it mean? What does Black wealth look like vis a vis white Americans? How do we think about it? How do you accumulate it, et cetera, et cetera? And so I do that 2 or 3 times a year, and I pick a topic and we go deep on it because I have to be their coach and mentor.
I'm making a note of that. I'm gonna actually start that with my son. I really like that, man. And I'm also curious, Chip, given your interest in Black history, do your sons share that? Do you cause them, or have you initiated a deep dive into Black history like you've taken?
I would say they're getting there, right?
Hmm.
They're finishing colleges and working on their careers. They don't have the same level of passion that I do, but I think by sheer association, and if you're at our residence with inside my home library and study, the 300 plus books, that they're, by association, they're curious and they want to learn. But it's often that I'll say to them, I'll cut out an excerpt and say, hey guys, I want you to read that. And I want you to be aware of that. So they're taking interest, but they're focusing on their career.
So, Chip, we're winding down here. So, I want to come back to the subject of leadership. The mood in this country feels uneasy. And at a minimum, we could use a large dose of Danny Meyer's enlightened hospitality, just spread it around the country. Um, where what is good for few, I love that he starts with the workforce and concentric circles outward, the stakeholders, the
Yep.
community. I mean, that's mankind, really, and I love that. It's a metaphor to me that really is applicable to how I would love to see our society governed, our world governed, and what's good for a few is good for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you turn for inspiration these days, Chip, what gives you what keeps you inspired and gives you the ability to inspire?
Well, I would say a couple of things. Our leaders inspire me, and I mean that sincerely, right? Our leaders inspire me every day. Um, we just opened a restaurant yesterday. Hispanic woman. It's a daily provisions. We opened it in a community right across the Hudson in Jersey City. I get inspiration from our leaders because they're passionate about what they do. Um, Mike Anthony is executive chef of of Grammercy Tavern, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is James Beard, Michelin star chef. And I get inspiration from our leaders. I just named a few. I like spending time with them. Um, Women, black, white, our leaders inspire me. I'm inspired by the readings of all of those books that we reference in my library. I still read whether it's M.L. King or Coretta Scott King. When I'm reading, I get inspired. Even the most challenging books that go deep into the Jim Crow era of lynching, etc. When I read through some of the stories, I'm inspired by the past and the people that have an impact. And I get inspired, lastly, Brad, by seeing others when their dreams come true, when their aspirations come true. And that gives me great inspiration. And I like hanging around with people who are warm and optimistic, who dream big and then kind of chase their dream. And so those three influences help shape me, they inspire me. And then I hope what I do is kind of share that inspiration, share that hope today and moving forward. Last night, I had the opportunity to speak to 25 students at NYU. The class was dominated by young females. They're graduate students, and it's a class on hospitality. And I'm inspired by them, but I was also giving them hope and inspiration for our future.
Wow, Danny Meyer is a smart man. Chip Wade in charge. Chip, a last question. It's a little, kind of lighthearted, but I'm sure someone out there is listening and wants to know. They want to open a restaurant. What would you tell them?
Man, I would tell them to do it, right? I love it when people dream and dream big. So I would say do it, and follow your love, not your passion, right? I think people have to follow their love, so I would tell them to do that. I would tell them to understand the importance of culture and people, right? Always start with people and surround yourself with great people, because those people can help inspire you and bring insights, ideas, and shares. And the last thing I would tell them is know your numbers, know the business of restaurant, right? Understand the power of the P&L, understand how you make money, right? Because if you just follow the love and then you follow your passion and you find the right people, but you fail to understand the business of hospitality in restaurants, you won't prosper and succeed.
I'm sure my wife, Linda, who is off screen as a producer, is chuckling here because she's a CPA, Chip, and she came into my life about 20 years ago and changed my bottom line. I could have used her 20 years earlier, but just the same, man. But yeah, that financial discipline piece is an important one.
Yeah.
Chip Wade, I hope to end up on the court, maybe me, you, and Eric shooting a little horse one of these days, man, and look forward to that. But, brother, I so appreciate you, man, and really admire what you do. Thank you for making the time today.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, man. You, Eric, and I may be a bit slower than we were, but I look forward to that game as well.
My man.
All right, brother.
Thanks, Chip.
All the best. Thank you. Take care.